absolutely fantastic support. Brilliant. People were all down the road. It was wonderful. Then we went onto the River Thames, down to the Cuddy Sark, and had the flame of light. It was absolutely fantastic. Really, really good support. I've had a fantastic time, well supported, and thank the RNIB for supporting me. It was really, really good. Thank you. Okay, would you like to hold the talk?
You sort of sit in thinking, oh well, of getting the honour degree, and then you suddenly realise that it's in front of an audience, and then you're thinking, well, what will they make of me and being part of their ceremony? And then you think, well, actually that's exactly what this is about. This is honouring ability, and to be part of that, you then get a sense of excitement, and again honour again, because you're being included in something that they've worked very, very hard.
And I'm back again. It's Hassan Khan with our second interview. But before I do move on to that, I must thank all of you for watching the first interview. I've had some positive reviews. Don't you worry, I can put up with constructive criticism, so do keep those comments coming. Do subscribe to the channel, because every time we post a video you'll then get a notification, and give us a thumbs up. It's really important, because during these lockdown period I really want as many people to listen to these, not only because it will be entertaining, but believe you me, it is an education that is opening my eyes. I don't know about you. Now, in the last episode we heard Mujahid and Amit talking frankly about mental health and cricket, but more essentially how cricket has changed their life. Today I bring you something quite extraordinary. I'm calling this one the Legends Special. Now, for those of you who don't know Sir Roy Smith and Sir Michael Brace, these two gentlemen, between them, have got a CBE, an MBE. Not only have they formed and developed a local club in the shape of Metro, but they've ensured that VI sport continues to grow around the world thanks to their hard work over the last 47 years. Without further ado, let me now bring in Roy Smith, MBE, and Mike Brace, CBE. Many thanks for your time, gentlemen, and how are you today?
Very good.
Hi, Hassan. Roy, nice to speak to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time. These are difficult times. We are facing unprecedented times. How have you been coping? What have been your coping mechanisms up to now?
We've been talking to each other and sharing stories and useful telephone numbers to try and get home shopping sorted out. We've both been out walking. Mike's fortunately got two dogs, which gets him out the house and gets a walk around. And me and Kathy both like walking. So we've been up to Richmond Park, which is now closed to traffic. So it's a very pleasant area at the moment. And we've been, like I said, we've got a park gym by the side of the house, which we've been keeping fit and safe.
I've been circulating lots of quiz questions that people are sending me. I don't know why they're sending it to me, because most of the answers I haven't got a clue about, but I get all these quizzes that I then pass on to other people, and I've been starting to clear a garage with 47 years of junk in it, and I've even started to do some gardening, which I never ever thought I would bring myself to say. I'm out there weeding and sifting earth and everything else. Haven't got a clue what I'm doing. What I've tended to do is, if I pulled it up and it grows again, it was a weed. And if I pull it up and it doesn't grow again, it was a flower. So that's my model of gardening.
And obviously you both have got sporting backgrounds, as do I. We miss football, cricket, tennis on the radio. How have you been coping with that sport then?
That's been quite difficult, really, just trying to do the exercise. I suppose luckily we're getting to the stage where our sporting activities was much more as a observer or as a spectator, and we did some physical exercise, but our sort of weekly going out and being competitive is probably less now than it was, say, 20, 30 years ago. So from my point of view, it's frustrating because I can't get to the gym, but I can still do some basic exercise and walking. So fitness wise, it's suffering a bit, but I'm not going totally stir crazy that I'm not then competing with my teams and stuff.
I mean, we both worked very hard leading up to Ski for Light, which we went over to America for our first Ski for Light competition, because I was amazed how many years Metro have been going to Norway, which is about 47 years. So again, that started, was it 74, Mike?
74, yeah. And like Roy, we were scheduled to go to Norway on the 21st of March with 15 Metro members and about 6, 7, 8 other people from all over the country. And the week before, it then got cancelled by the organisers. So we would have been over there that first week in lockdown, skiing the annual Beitostølen ski week in Norway. So again, like Roy, I was trying to get fit for that, and because it's a pretty extensive format over there. You do a 10k and a race and a 6k biathlon, and then a 20k race, and it nearly in my 70s now. Then you're competing with all the old guys that I used to race 30 years ago. So it still brings out the old competitive spirit, but it's and Roy's been in a few times and he just knows what it's like over there. It's an amazing event. And having said, less competitive, as soon as you get the number on your back, it's like turning the clock back 40 years.
We had quite a few Metro members going to take part in the London Marathon, which again, it's like as you mentioned, Hassan, it's the environment we're in now. This is where we are today. Things like the London Marathon being cancelled, which is there's a multi-million-pound fundraising for loads of charities.
Absolutely. As I said to both of you, when I started playing cricket in 2003, and it's no disrespect to you, it was the best thing I ever did, pulled on a Metro shirt, but I was playing alongside 30, 40, 50-year-olds who had amazing jobs, lives, wives, and I was learning from that. It was a new kind of education for me. But when I was playing alongside you guys, you were Roy Smith and Mike Brace. Little did I know the history. And so, Mike, why don't we start? How did you first meet Roy?
Well, it goes back to the early 70s. I worked as a shorthand typist as my first job, having left Linden Lodge School, and I hated it. I suddenly realised, working in the civil service as a shorthand typist, I wasn't very civil and I was no one's servant. So I was very bored. And I met up with 2 or 3 of friends of mine from Linden Lodge, and we then were playing cricket for the London Sports Club. And we used to go along to the cricket, and basically they weren't very competitive. If the ball went past one of the fielders, they just said, oh, someone else will get it. And the total blind fielders really weren't interested in very much. And it was really a bit of a joke. So we were young Turks, we were in our 20s, a bit like you were saying about the early days, and we felt, look, this is bad. There were 2 of us were totals, 2 were partially sighted. They were like the sort of Lillian Thompson of the cricket world at school, really fit young guys, and Alan Maybert and Keith Wells. And the other totally blind one was Graham Salmon. And we said, look, this is ridiculous. We tried to get things changed in London Sports Club and foul. We wanted to get better outings and various other things. Couldn't really get any discussion going. So I then said, well, hold on, rather than moaning about it and be disruptive, why don't we do something about it? Get off our backsides and look at forming a new sports club. So my three friends from school, Graham Salmon, Keith Wells, Alan Maybert, and I said, well, we'll meet up at a pub in Victoria, and 3 or 4 others from London Sports Club came and joined us, and we agreed that we would form a sports club. So we put a £5 in, which I still haven't got back, and we set the club up, and I think it's constituted now from 1973. So I applied for Charity Commission agreement for us to be a registered charity. And the cricket then was the first team we had. And we had, quite a few people suddenly wanting to play. A lot of kids from our ex-school came, lots of people from the sports clubs. And so we started to play cricket for about a year in those early 70s. And then we started to say, well, what we should do is a bit more than just the cricket. And we got invited to the BSAD game, British Sports Association for the Disabled Games for the physically disabled up in Stoke Mandeville. So we went to that and we got more and more members in. So we had a member living over Adam's house in Dulwich, which was a hostel or hope unit for the vision impaired over in that area. And we went over there to cheer him up and, gee him along because he was feeling a bit isolated, which is interesting with today's things about the isolation and everything else. One of the guys in this hostel was a bloke called Roy Smith, big geezer, had a bit of sight and a bit surly, I thought. He sort of grunted a bit and it came over as really not being that sure. He wanted to be where he was. We didn't know anything about him. We thought, well, and I don't think he was that sure about blind people. He'd met one or two in the hostel, but not really any broader base than that in terms of what they were up to and what they were interested in. And we said we were going over to the pub, which I don't think was a regular occurrence from there. And I said to him, do you fancy coming over then? And he basically ummed and ahed, and I'd said, well, please yourself if you can't be bothered, sort of thing. And he then said, oh, well, perhaps I will. And that was I think that was 1974, Roy, and we haven't had to get rid of him since. I mean, he's, every time I go to the pub, he's there. Every time we used to meet up for all the cricket, football, everything, he was there. So he became a real linchpin then of Metro. Do you remember that, Roy?
Yeah, very much so. Being 21 and married with a 9 months on, your career's gone out the window. I was trained to be a quantity surveyor. So I couldn't read drawings anymore and work in the field I was hoping to be in. So I went through a very, very dark period of, bordering on suicide. I couldn't tell you the number of the bus. I couldn't tell you where I was going. I couldn't recognize people at work. I couldn't recognize my wife. I couldn't recognize my friends. I couldn't go into a restaurant. I completely lost all my confidence completely. And it is thanks to Mike and people like that pulled me up and said, look, we can do it. You can do it. So it was a real shake up when I met Metro and realized that, there was life. There was light at the end of a tunnel, but it was a very dark tunnel for me at the time. One of the things that had been suggested to me was to sort of find out more about how the lives of VI people, how they got around the issues of traveling and employment, etc. Luckily, where I was working, they kept me on and wanted to retrain me in whatever job I could do. But I went over to Adam's house for a few weeks, and it's just a coincidence that I met Mike, and then Mike, like I said, took me to the pub, and then I went to a meeting that Mike's, where his offices were in Victoria. They used to meet in a place in Monk Street, and really then followed that was meeting up with other Metro people, which I found something to, my frustrations really. I had so much energy to burn at that young age, and I found sport was the way that got me through my very, very bad sort of depression I was going through at the time.
And Hassan, it was really interesting because we obviously, a bit like we were saying earlier on, that you largely experienced sight loss by some of the people around you. And in those days, and I think it's really important, that a lot of us had gone to special schools. Our inputs around sport, around games, around technology, around anything really, came from the other kids in the blind school. The clock going 40 odd years forward, I'd have thought in those days that we Metro would have become, if you like, less of a important, because obviously it would then be built into everything that's around people. But in fact, what's happened is that's got less of an issue, because most kids now with a vision impairment have either got dual disability or have gone into mainstream schools. So their exposure to sport has got less rather than increased. And so the need for Metro, instead of sort of dwindling on the vine, has then increased massively. My early mantle was mainly kids that have been to special schools, mainly knew each other from that sort of process. we all then gathered together around the sports that we'd always played. So football, cricket, a bit of athletics, rowing were really and swimming probably were the only things that were being done. And then obviously people like Roy came on board with, well, do people do this? And we said, well, not really. And he would say, well, why not then? Why don't they do that? And that spurred us to then try and look at other things that other people were then raising as perhaps something we should look at.
Good example of that, Mike, is obviously when we got a team together, went down to Stoke Mandeville back in the sort of 74, 75. Although it was the home of the Paralympics from 48, there'd been no VI inclusion in the Paralympics. So what we were faced with in Stoke Mandeville, we thought was going to be the mecca of sport, was a 60-metre concrete strip with a rose bush at one end. So there was no track. All the field events were on grass. The whole place was designed for people in wheelchairs and not for people with sight loss. There were so many hazards. So, from that, really, like you said, Mike, 74, we went off to Norway, 75, BSAD, 76, the sort of trials. But then really it started developing because we got together then and put on the first national athletics championships at East London, the Metro First National Games, which is still going today.
And those early days were really quite crucial because, as we mentioned earlier, 1974, Metro had been formed a year or 18 months. Someone contacted us and said, had any of the visually impaired from London fancied or ever tried skiing? I honestly thought the bloke was bonkers, that blind people skiing just really. And he said, but they're doing it in Norway and they've got the 10th anniversary of this event founded by a blind man in Norway. Would we want to go over? So quite a number from Metro, there's about a dozen of us from Metro and two or three others, all then decided we would go over to ski in Norway in 74. And having done that, basically we 2 years later found that three of us from Metro, Graham Salmon, myself and Peter Young, were actually then in the trials to compete in the first winter Paralympic Games that they ever held in Sweden in 1976, which all three of us got selected for. So suddenly, if Metro hadn't been there in 74, we wouldn't have got the invite and we wouldn't then have started to do the skiing. And then similarly, as Roy's mentioned, in 74, 75, went to the BSAD. The systems there were pretty shambolic and, it was really pretty awful. Long jump on grass. You couldn't run up on any of the throwing events because the wheelchairs couldn't run up. So therefore, neither could the blind. And so we pressurized everyone. At the same time, they held the trials for the 76 Summer Games, and those were the first Paralympic Games that the blind were actually included for the first time. So we suddenly then said, look, you can't carry on like this. You can't, they had a multi-sport event that had swimming, running and shot discus and javelin. So it was, really mix and match. And we said, look, this is so much of a fiasco that we're not going to be part of this anymore. What we'll do is form our own games. So that then pushed me and a few others to set up a committee to run the first Metro Games. And we then, having been at Linden Lodge, the headmaster of Linden Lodge School acted as one of our time officials and the games supervisor. And we had our committee meetings then at Linden Lodge with some of the teachers that taught us a number of years earlier, who then ended up acting as the main support mechanism for the Metro Games, which then started in 1977.
We've obviously got, Zoom, Skype, emails. It sounds like you had a lot of input from other people. There was good partnership work. How did you pull people together?
Again, around that sort of time, it's interesting that the Metros and then Worcester Old Boys, London Sports, we managed to make contact with other clubs around the country and other schools like Worcester School, RNC. There were 5 visually impaired schools in London, at that time in the 70s. So we started trying to have competition between schools and colleges. And then Mike got involved in the beginning of the BASRAB, which now is BBS. I joined them, their first AGM, and joined as one of their first trustees. And Graham, who really got the bug for the running from St Mandeville and then from 77, him and his wife Mari moved on forward and started getting coaching down at Crystal Palace and at different places and at the track at East London. Other people got some coaching over at White City, again near Stamford Brook, where Poplington's lodge was. So people started taking up athletics. We got BBS going. So at the time, Hassan, as you asked, we were sending out audio cassettes. We were sending out braille documents. Mike was doing a lot of browling. And we were sending out large print newsletters. We got involved with Metro people going to the 1980 Paralympics. Then the European Athletics started. 81 I went to with some Metro members. Mike, where was the winter around that time as well?
Yale in 80. And basically, what we did was a lot of it was done by telephone. Yep. I think it would probably be fair to say, Roy, that a lot of the communication took place in the pubs quite a lot as well. So they were.
I can tell.
Victoria seemed to be the hub place to meet up. You know,
there used to be a pub in the Whistle Stop pub was actually in the approach road to Victoria Station. So it was really easy to find, but it wasn't actually in the station. So that was a real big sort of hub for us to develop, as well as looking at building up Metro. And we had about 30, 40, 50 members. We had a couple of cricket teams. We then got asked to look at other things to do. What by word of mouth then got around that instead of just a boring old cricket club, what we were doing was really quite innovatory stuff. We had an outdoor pursuits holiday down in Devon, where we did grass skiing and scuba diving and sand yachting, which was just an amazing trip. And then we got invited to go and play a game called Tourball, which was like an early version of goalball in Germany and in France. So we took people over there, but we were over there, you know, playing against the Germans and stuff like that. I had a fantastic time, went to the beer festivals, and then, you know, word got round that this was a buzzing club to be part of. So we
regular football at Holland Park, Mike.
Yeah, we started evening classes at Holland Park, and we used the gym there. Then that also got added to doing ski training classes there as well, once we got a few more. And that went for years. We got various people doing that as a full evening class. So you were registered, paid your evening class money, because that was about the only way of getting that type of activity. And so we supported that. As having set up BBS, or BASRAB as it was, I was also involved then with the British Ski Club for the Disabled in getting that sport then on the international agenda, having been to the Winter Games. So we suddenly had two national committees looking at skiing and multi-sports with BASRAB, BBS. So word was getting round that it wasn't just cricket focused that people could do. And that's how it started to evolve in that sort of 70s, 80s time. The innovation was just unbelievable, you know, looking back on it, like the audio cassette newsletters that my wife Maureen read for 20 odd years or whatever we had, and Dawn was one of the editors on that, and Debbie and various other people. They all started to do that. We had a committee that obviously started to play a bigger role in coming up with ideas, and it gradually then grew and grew. So we started to get, you know, 40, 50, 60, 70 members. And of course, every time you got a new member, they said, what about X, Y, Y, Z? Can we try this? Can we try that?
Hassan, at that time, obviously we needed to raise more and more money. We had more and more people going abroad, more and more people wanted subsidies, more and more travel. We organised a swimming gala at Linden Lodge School, where we were sponsoring people to swim certain lengths. I know Mike's mum pulled me out of the water. I nearly died.
Oh,
remember that?
Yeah.
What happened?
And a couple of times every year we would run, we would walk across all the London bridges. Again, we had, I think about 84, we got talking to some people with Marks and Spencers, and we got £16,000 from Marks and Spencers in 84, which we managed to buy a very, very big fast copier for tape cassettes, and that made a massive difference. We got a small photocopier, we got other equipment that we desperately needed, and that gave the club again another massive boost. And around about that time, Mike, I think you stood down as chair after about 9 or 10 years, and I took the chairman role for about another 30, 40 years. And working again with BBS, we both were on the BBS Athletics, which took, again, team. I, played the role as chef de mission with the athletics, and then multi-sport, and Mike played the same role developing British Paralympic Association.
That's an incredible amount of achievement in those 12 years. I was actually going to ask about the funding. Did you have any support from other charitable organisations like Princess Trust or anything like that?
No, the Princess Trust and the others weren't really very active in that sort of era, really. They in the 70s, really, it was, virtually, we had a few run-ins with some of the VI charities. R&B were looking to lead. One of the early managers of the blind team was someone from the RNB, and we had all the classifications there, which was a bit chaotic. And again, we said, look, not being too rude to them, but trying to make the point that their background had no idea about sport, and the notion that blind people doing sport at a fairly high level would have any knowledge or input around anything to do with managing sport and fitness and everything else was a bit of an anathema to them. So we then said, look, this is ridiculous. BBS should be the people running blind sport, not the RNIB or any of the other charities, because it's a sports charity, not a general one. Metro then basically wanted to be as independent as we could. So as Roy said, we did all the fundraising. 83, we did a big fundraising thing, mainly to raise money for the ski team going to the 84 games. And that again was myself, Peter Young and Jimmy Denton, who's still a life member. We did 3 marathons in 3 sports in 30 days to raise enough money to support the Metro people going to the 84 games. And we did the ski marathon in Norway, which was 42k. We then did the Devizes to Westminster canoe marathon, which is 125 miles and 70 odd portages. And then the third one was the London Marathon in 83. And the issue was that we had to finish all 3 because the tickets that we sold was to guess the overall time it took me to do all 3 marathons. And what was that then? Sorry?
What was the time? How long did it take?
It took, in the end, it was something like 37 hours, 20 minutes. I had a bad London and did something like 5 hours something for that. I did 4 hours and something in the ski marathon. And then the canoe marathon was the worst conditions in the history to that point of the race. And I did 27 hours and 28 minutes or something like that. And we then finished 41st out of 182 crews, because 100 then dropped out because of the conditions were so bad. So of the 82 finished, we were 41st. Again, trying to find someone else that would run with you in those days to do marathon running and train with you, trying to find someone that would take on you on a 125 canoe race with them doing, obviously the looking, as it were, and then obviously finding someone to ski with you was probably the easiest because we were in the British team by then. But that was, again, more about what it taught ourselves. I'd never been as exhausted ever in my life. I never thought I would ever feel that bad. But it really did make you dig deep. It made you realise what resources you then did have.
Interesting, because you're saying that's 1983. Well, 1983 was also the second European Athletics Championships, and the first one it was under the BBS and me and you both involved in it. But I actually went over there and high jumped for Great Britain, and John Anderson, who again a master coach, had been coaching Moorcroft to his world record 5,000 meters, and to Liz McColgan and a host of other England and Scottish athletes. So he came on board with the BBS team, and we never looked back then because we got so many more people involved. He brought excellent coaches along, and the whole standard of athletics became very, very professional. He managed to get us some deal with Adidas. And that was around that sort of 83, 84 period, keeping Metro going with the investment from Marks and Spencer's. And again, like you said, the fundraising that we had to do to feed, the enthusiasm and the passion and the competition from our members that wanted to keep going to more competitions. We mentioned the Metro Games in 77, but not long after that, Manchester put on a multi-sport festival, which maybe 6-7 events, very followed by Sazrab, the Scottish, put on a athletics. So very quickly after Metro, we had 5 competitions a year. Then the Irish got on board, and the Irish Blind Sports Association in Dublin. And as you know, Mike, we took teams over to Dublin every year for a whole host of 10-pin bowling, whether it would be archery, 10-pin bowling, tandem, athletics, swimming. Five-a-side football was very, very popular. Just a few years before that, we were very, very fortunate to get Brian Johnson as our first president, Mike. And that again, that brought money in. It gave us an opportunity to meet more people. We did a lot of charity cricket matches, which brought in a lot of money. But the inclusion of Brian Johnson's with his links with BBC, that made a massive difference, didn't it?
Test match special, mentioned very often then the blind cricket, how the primary club would benefit from people out first ball in cricket. So he was very much their sort of patron, as it were, and got me involved then. I became a committee member of the primary club, looking at grant aiding then anything to do with grassroots sports. And of course, the whole evolution then became more and more knowledge around Metro. I mean, looking back, it is amazing. When we first started the club, there were 3 or 4 cricket teams, Worcester Old Boys, us, London Sports Club. There was a general team of odds and ends called Nomads that one of our guys ran as well, but very few others. And then Avon Sports got fed in with a few people that we fed up there. And then you think now there were like 14 cricket clubs. So a lot of that embryonic stuff started because, we weren't very good at the beginning, and then Worcester Old Boys was the best, and then became always a battle between us and Worcester Old Boys. Every final, all the finals were then played at Barclays Cricket Ground. They had their own team because in those days telephony was largely done in the banks by blind telephonists. And so Barclays, they used to be called the Blind Bank of Barclays because they had their own cricket team, and we used their ground for the finals of any of the sports stuff. So again, it was a bit London-centric because there was very little elsewhere, but linked into BBS, then putting that into getting more clubs to play against, started to then to evolve that into us going up to Worcester School and playing, and Dalton House we went over to try and get their cricket, which is another vision impaired school that's now closed. But it was again trying to get their activities going. And then through the 80s, we then started to expand the sports, and Roy then became chairman. I did 10 years. We had a brief interlude with Graham Salmon was the second chairperson of Metro, but for various reasons he stood down after about 6-8 months, which left us a bit in the lurch. That's where Roy stood in. He basically said, oh, well, if someone's got to do it, might as well be me. I don't think, if I'm honest, Roy, you would have put yourself forward as the chair of a committee in those days. So you were, chairing committees probably wasn't your strong, doing things and, doing stuff yourself, but getting other people and pushing them to do it was probably big learning skill for you, wasn't it?
I think so. But I think I got the I think the wisdom I started gaining from meeting people like Ron Gordon, the BBS, the people on that sort of group, gave me more confidence, and I gained confidence then from, from people like yourself, Graham, Youngie, Longate, experienced people that were all backing me, which was good. I think undoubtedly the quality we've had as trustees, the people that have been really innovative and really moved forward. These people have challenged us every time to say, come on, let's try a new sport. Let's move forward.
I wonder whether our audience is thinking Hassan's definitely gone to grab a cup of tea. Absolutely not. I'm just enthralled and cannot believe my luck. Now, Mike, tell me about This Is My Life. How did that come about?
That was quite funny, Hassan. I mean, you'd appreciate that. The Metro Cricket AGM, by that time in the 80s, was pretty sacrosanct, really. It was our big sport. It was a primary thing that we all did, and basically got us a lot of publicity because we were in the final and the MV and the rivalry and everything else. And on the Monday of the week of the cricket AGM, the captain then, Robbie Bryden, phoned me up to say, I'm cancelling the meeting on Wednesday because I've got to work. And I said, well, look, that's crazy. I can chair the meeting for you. No need to cancel the meeting. I can do it. And he said, no, I want to be there. It's cancelled. I phoned everyone. And I thought, oh, you're joking. And I sat down and said to my wife, the guys aren't going to like this, that Robbie's only cancelled the cricket meeting. And she said, oh, blimey, it must be serious. And I said, yeah, well. And then the phone rang again, and it was Brian Johnson, our president, the Brian Johnson, ringing me up to say, could you do an interview about blind cricket for the World Service of the BBC on Wednesday? And I said, well, would you believe it? I said, up until that point, about 2 minutes ago, I'd have had to say no, because it's our cricket meeting. I said, it's just been cancelled. So didn't have a clue. And then turned up on the Wednesday, having had a busy day at work, etc., turned up to the World Service, having them sent me a car, to find Eamon Andrews and Brian Johnson outside saying, for a very good reason, because tonight this is your life. And when we had the programme, brought on a couple of people I was at school with at Linden Lodge. We had people like Alan Maybert came on as one of my school friends, and etc. One of the teachers from Linden Lodge came on. And then afterwards, it was like, This Is Your Life Part 2, because half the people from the school, all the cricket meeting were there, about 20 Metro members. And that was just phenomenal. And we had a really big party till 1 a.m. So again, that level of publicity was around not so much me, but it's around the fact that we did sport. Blind people did sport and skiing and football and athletics and cricket and stuff like that.
I'm truly staggered. Like I said before, a lot of these things I've read about, but to hear it from the horse's mouth, that's brilliant. So let me take you to 86. You've moved the cricket club down to Highgate. What was the reason behind that?
The only ground that we could get a pitch at was Regent's Park, and it was literally a grass area in the middle of the park. And frequently you would have blind people running to try and get the ball and falling over sunbathers who were actually sunbathing on the pitch, just spread out, because they saw these blokes chasing a football, because it was a big football then, a size 5, not a size 3 that we moved to. So they just didn't think it was, a proper game.
The ball went in the lake a few times.
Yeah, someone hit the ball in the lake, and George Simmons, one of our members, then had to swim the lake to get our football. No one else had another ball to play with, and came out covered in duck's poo and everything else, and carried on playing. And it was just really getting to a stage where, again, what I'd said earlier on, we took things a bit more seriously than some things. And we thought, why shouldn't we have a proper cricket ground? So we negotiated with another team that was playing at Highgate, and we then managed to do a ground share with them over probably 30 years. And then I worked in Islington at that stage, and one of our volunteers in the social work job that I did, she then became our tea lady. Every time I mentioned Joyce, they always remember her egg sandwiches, which were to die for. There used to be a a separate hut down in Highgate. And then in 87, you probably heard about the big wind that was there. Well, the hut that we used to do the food in blew down. It blew away and collapsed. And therefore, after that, we lost our bit there. So we had to do it just as a sort of buffet thing outside. We were probably the only cricket club to actually have our home ground in those days. I don't think any of the others had a regular home ground. They just had to get a place where they could perform. And the finals then obviously started to get more serious as we pushed all the sports stuff, and with Brian Johnson and all the other people that we knew, that's when they started to look at the finals perhaps going to somewhere like Lord's.
We started linking in with national governing bodies, as Mike said, whether it be, ECB, whether it be Middlesex Cricket Board, whether it be MCC. We got very good connections, whether it was the 3As. Again, we started working very much. The success of the Metro Games was that we not only involved, great, fantastic hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, but we also got involved with 3As. So we got the right officials, professional coaching. And we've taken that philosophy all the way through. Same as Mike, we had very, very good, excellent, again, top quality Norwegian skiers, Mike. Most of the success from the Paralympics, the guides that you use were top world-class skiers from Norway. And then again, that made an enormous difference to our team, that they had the quality of the coaching, certainly through athletics, through, where we were doing swimming, whatever we were doing. We looked at always employing or, arm twisting, got top coaches to work with us. And I think Brian boosted us into that professional level. And I think we took that right up to today now with the LTA. Again, when tennis came over here from Japan, we're talking 15 years ago now. But again, we went straight to the national governing body, and it took years and years. We put on again the first nationals, again, another first for us, for Metro. And then very followed on a few years of that. And again, the competition started going around the country, and the LTA then took it over. But again, it's that leadership of that with the trustees that we had at the time were always keen to get us to another level. Same with certainly with the quality of people that we had as chef de mission and management. Mike, I know you played a massive role with that with BPA, not only the equipment that was where, the accommodation people stayed at. And again, making sure that the VI people were not, second class. They were given the same as able-bodied, and that, followed the right way through. Because there were some very, very disgraceful internationals put on, and the Atlanta will certainly go down in history. And the Paralympics has been the worst Paralympics ever for anybody to go to. The conditions, because although the Olympics itself was fine, the Paralympics, all the sponsors had moved out. There was no food, there was no accommodation, there was no officials. They really had to rally around to try and put on some event. Whereas, Mike can be extremely proud of 2012, where at last all the conditions were exactly the same, and it just went up to that equal level. And we got involved with Claire Balding.
The interesting thing is, obviously, this discussion's focusing on Roy and I, but the issue really was the power that Metro then played in that. Because if we didn't have like-minded people that could perform and be the best skiers, be the best footballers, be the best cricketers, be the best swimmers or whatever, then basically we would have been shouting in the dark. And so unless we could show we'd had 5, 10, 15, 20 people that could do these wonderful things, then basically, it wouldn't have happened. And if we then look back, that I was trying to work out over the years, in the 40 odd years that Metro have been going, I think we've probably had 150, perhaps even 200 people that have ended up representing their country at some form of international event. I mean, wow. Dozens in the athletics, dozens in the cricket, bowls, swimming, you name it. Virtually every sport that's now done by the vision impaired, Metro have had someone that's actually competed at that international level.
I don't think it's being biased. No. We are trailblazers. But what about taking cricket abroad. Tell me about South Africa.
Yeah, that was an amazing 93. We had our 20th anniversary celebrations at Lord's Cricket Ground. Brian Johnson was one of the main speakers. As part of my This Is Your Life, had people like Ozzy Ardiles on there, so he came along. We had the guy that used to run the green room to do our emceeing, and we had this 20th anniversary do at Lord's, which was absolutely phenomenal. 3 weeks after that, Brian Johnson had his stroke, and then within a few weeks he died in January 1994. And we were really, really devastated. I mean, he was doing so much for us. 95, then they had a memorial service for him at Westminster Abbey. 20 of us from Metro then acted as a guard of honour. As people filed into Westminster Abbey, we had 20 Metro members standing there, in deference to him. Now, the reason I mentioned that was that Brian was always saying, cricket is a universal game. Cricket is something that we've exported over the years, and where does it fit within blind cricket? We were saying, well, not a lot. There really isn't much international activity. We'd fed into the setup of perhaps an international cricket team or cricket sort of event, and that was being planned for some time in the future, 97, 98 or whatever. And we then decided that one of our members was from South Africa and been to a blind school in South Africa, which was also called Worcester, which is the same as the blind school over here. And he said, there's no cricket being played in South Africa at all. Why don't we think about having a trip to South Africa? And I think a few people basically thought, A, we were bonkers. B, obviously the political thing over there was not very good. Apartheid had just been dismantled, so it was a better time to go. We asked around, and there was a big support for it. The slight problem was that we had to raise, we thought, about £3,000 per person in order to make it viable for the 16 of us to go over there. And we bit the bullet, and then decided we would go and did the fundraising, did various events. We had all sorts of activities. Individuals then put any balances in. And we then said, right, we're going to do a cricket tour of South Africa. And we played matches in Johannesburg with the blind team. We then went down to Worcester and introduced blind cricket there and got them playing. We then managed to play a sighted prison unit team actually in the prison. We went to the local prison and played some of the inmates and the wardens at blind cricket, so that the blind team at Worcester would have a team to play. And then we left them bats, balls, full set of kit, whites and everything else. We had the privilege of doing a demo in Newlands Cricket Ground, and the plaque, there's a Union Jack and the South African flag with Metro versus South African VI 11 is a plaque that's behind the bar in Newlands from when we played there, and it was the Western and the Eastern Province match. And so we then took the whole notion of cricket to South Africa, and then 18 months later they actually entered rather sluggishly the first World Cup for blind cricket and bloody won it. So we'd obviously taught them pretty well, really, because they actually won the first World Cup.
And that was in India, 1998, where you were managing.
I was managing the England blind cricket team, obviously raising money for it as well through BBS. And we took a team out there, and they did pretty well, actually, but we didn't obviously win. I think we got to the semi-finals, and it was the air ball then, it wasn't the hard ball that they use now. But then that changed after that with the hard ball and underarm bowling and all the other stuff. So that you're very familiar with.
But Hassan, what this leads to, not only do we have, I was involved in, BBS as well as national and internationally. Mike, again, with his hat with BPA on. But we we found that some of our members also got the sort of international bug, and people became members of the first World Council for bowls, World Council for cricket, and again they were going to overseas meetings. So during this period, this sort of 25 year period, we managed to get some sponsorship. One of our members was involved with advertising, so we managed to get printed programs with selling advertising. Again, that fundraising where I know I clearly have been involved in well over £1 million in raising money for blind sport, and I know Mike has. So it was a massive investment, but our members and trustees also, again, someone got involved in international tennis. They've always played a role in this, like you said, this leadership, this showing what people can be doing. So it was a massive boost for a lot of our female members, women members to start playing the sport at the right level. We did that tandem event, Mike, round the Great Britain.
Yeah, sporting. We did that many years and won lots of medals at that, and then did some longer cycle events, and it gave that sort of impetus. I know, Peter, we've had a number of members that are multi-sports. I think there were 4 members that have competed in different international events in 4 different sports.
One of the big changes, Hassan, was, though, again, 2 things really. BBS was made up of individual members, but when I was chair and Mike was chair, we had a membership structure for clubs to join and schools and colleges. So if you were a club over 50 members, you paid a slightly more rate. But that encouraged everybody to be members of BBS, because the whole success of any club was communication. As you mentioned, how did we get the information round? How did we get it round to people? Producing newsletters was a massive big difference, and same as the investment we did with when I started the website from some colleagues where I was working at work. We started our first website. At the same time, the government, its wisdom to think, well, we're going to close all the blind schools and integrate VI children, which is about 35,000 VI children, into mainstream schools. Well, that was fine, but sport, as Mike mentioned earlier, suffered badly because we didn't have the groups then. They weren't being taught by the teachers that have been used to coaching sport for the blind. And we went back to grassroots. I remember getting some colleagues from work and working with Arsenal Football Club, and we're putting on just events across London for juniors. Around this time, TPT had the wisdom to set up with Roger Clifton a group in East London called Elvis, and then Selvis, and these represented certain London boroughs. And these London boroughs, we put on have a go days, trying to attract the children at mainstream schools to have a taste for the first time of what VI sport was all about, so they could come along. One of Metro's major philosophies and thing that's kept us in great stead is always meet and greet. So whether we're meeting at the ticket barriers of railway stations, so we encourage this right through every sport we've done, for every staff member we've had, every volunteer. We met somebody and took them along, whether it be to Highgate, whether it be to an athletics track, took them along to make sure they knew the route so they could do it independently. And that's what the club was all about, was getting people's independence, giving them that confidence.
I've got to say, in 2003, when I joined Metro, Adam Benjamin, for our first game, come and met me in Tooting, took me all the way, and then brought me back home.
Wow,
now, obviously, I knew that he couldn't keep doing that. And if I wanted to be independent and be motivated and to be amongst those boys, I knew that I had to learn from that and do it myself eventually. But it's that kick up the backside is what I got, which helped me on my way.
Linking back to when I met Roy in 74, when we came to the school and met you, you were stood out as a keen, fit youngster playing cricket in the school where the majority of the people around you were multiple disabilities and stuff like that. So suddenly you saw us really interested in playing playing cricket in almost the way that you felt it should be played. And when we said, well, do you want to come and play for us? It was we didn't need much persuading, did you? You sort of leapt at it. That was the incentive, because you knew then that other people were doing the things that you wanted to do. And that's what it's about. It's about giving that impetus to someone to say, actually, I want to do this really, really badly. What have I got to do in order to enable myself to do that? Whether it's your mobility, whether it's support around you, whether it's your physical skills. Exactly what the club's been about over those 40 odd years is seeing those youngsters suddenly, when we first had the mixed cricket teams, seeing some of the young girls that have all been told that basically sport really isn't for women, is it? And seeing some of the girls playing now, and when we've had people like Brenda and others, really, really playing major parts in the cricket as equal members, not as tokens and stuff like that. It's so elevating, really, just to see the role that the club's still playing in terms of innovation, in terms of encouragement, and giving people those opportunities.
We've produced the England blind women's captain, many captains who've gone on to captain the England blind cricket team, lead of bowls, you name it, we have led the way. And that's not being biased, that's just the truth.
Well, and of course, we've had chairs of British Blind Sport. I've been chair of the Paralympics because, again, we're involved, and you want to make the difference. You want to get things organised. Roy mentioned earlier on, I mean, he produced the first real sports magazine called Participation, and that started to bring all of that information, because that's what we're starved of as vision impaired people. How do we get the info? You don't see the paper adverts, you don't see the stuff on the tubes and stuff like that. So how do we get it? Well, Roy did Participation, we then did Metro newsletter, and through the person that used to do Participation also was the person that started to do the programme for the Metro Games, which then largely funded it. So the money we got in for that enabled us to spend the £3,000, £4,000, or whatever it cost to run that games for 100 people to come from abroad as well as here. We had people from Norway, South Africa, etc., all coming to participate in the games over the years. Now you've got the tennis, so that's almost going to rival bowls, I think, for the number of people now playing tennis. Roy then did the advent of the subcommittees, so we had 5 or 6 subcommittees then, because it was too much for us to almost do it all. Our role was then to get others to take on and do it, so it didn't revolve around Roy and I. So if we weren't around and weren't involved, then the club needed to ensure that it wasn't going to collapse or wither on the vine. My wife was secretary for years and years and years, and she's then stood down, I think, after 34 years as a support secretary. And again, we just need it to ensure that it's got that strength and breadth of activity.
Yeah, I mean, Mo played a major role along with other people, but the real membership secretary, Mike, of keeping all people's records, again, all on paper and cards, when digital. But that was a very, very important part. And I think, mentioned Mike, I think again the club grew so quickly that we had to have subcommittees with their own chairs running their own sports. And again, it's a good example of that. Again, finally was the last one was maybe the tennis one, where Amanda and Adette were going to Germany, to Ireland to promote the game, get more countries involved. Another thing that we did, we sent Metro members to Japan, where the game was actually created 30, 40 years ago. We went over to Japan, Amanda went, Adette went, and I think Alan Webley went, 3 Metro people, again showing how you coach totally blind people tennis, and what balls they get and what equipment they use, and that again was a massive boost. That's about nearly 15 years ago now. So all the way through Metro, we've not been shy to go abroad. We've not been shy to meet up with national governing bodies and show them how, the ability of people with sight loss throughout whatever ability and, and activities we can do to as wide a group as we can. And I think the subcommittees And then obviously now later, we're bringing it right up to date. The investment from Thomas Poppington Trust has made, again, an enormous difference as we've gone from hundreds of members to now we've got thousands of people following on newsletters, 6,000, 7,000 people following the website every month, Twitter. So it's all back to then that communication of what's going on and what's needed. People, want to know where they can go along, where they can take part, whether it's, other new events that have gone on like climbing, whether it be yoga or some of the, international competitions.
Blind rugby, isn't it, added to it or something recently? Yeah. I saw.
The
blind archery, the shooting. It's fantastic, the potential opportunities there.
Mike, we should really give more, to the lawn bowls, though, because that was, again, another major thing back in that 80s period. We talk about the explosion of sport, but lawn bowls, it was in the 1976 and 1980 Paralympics. It wasn't, I don't think it was in 84, but lawn bowls, they still got their world championships and it's all involved in the Commonwealth. And again, we've had Metro members representing Great Britain at the Worlds and at the Commonwealth Games. So again, Metro members, national championships, England champions, Scottish champions. So bowls played an amazing role in that period. Again, a very, very active subcommittee nationally. We're playing indoors and outdoors. I mean, bowls has been again, women playing, Mike. Again, we talked about, at the time, back in your days when we first started Metro, there was no sport for women at all. They weren't included in the bowls. They weren't included in the cricket. They weren't in the football. And we changed all that. And then, they now, I think there's likely more women playing tennis than there is. So we made a massive change. And again, as the subcommittees and the trustees, again, women have played a major role in moving forward.
Roy, with the history and the success that we've got and that we've had, you obviously are bound to have tragedies along the way. So tell me some of the tragedies that the club has faced. I mean, I know I've had to say a few goodbyes to a few of the members and players during my time at Metro.
Metro have lost the people we mentioned that set up Metro. Some of the conditions that came back and killed people that, the disease, their eye condition, although these people were Olympic, Paralympic level fitness, in their 40s came back and destroyed them. The cancer came back. And these is many, many people that we've known, Americans, we know Norwegian, Dutch, and sadly quite a few Metro members that have lost their lives through their sight condition. And that's been difficult to live with. We lost, obviously, Heinrich, in 2012. He lost, sadly, again, a great leader, spent all his own money to go around the world council meetings, promoting, his love of cricket. And he managed to compete again for Great Britain in Sydney, along with Jonathan Ward.
Mike, Roy, I could do this interview for 4 or 5 hours and I'd still feel I've missed questions and I've missed aspects of your honours. So why don't we spend the next 5 or so minutes talking about your personal accolades and your personal achievements, and you've been somewhat modest. Roy, tell me a little bit about your MBE. How did that come about?
The work, not only with Metro, but obviously with the work I did as a trustee of BBS and taking that to another level, nationally around the country and then international competition. Mike said participation, I think, made a big boost, and I was recognised as the MBE was for work with disability sport. Again, that was a great time for me. 1991, so I'd maybe been involved, nearly 20 years, 15, 20 years. It was fantastic because, it was in the June birthdays honours list. I went to Buckingham Palace in the November, and you're allowed to take a couple of people with you. And one of them was my mum, who, extremely proud. But, a few months after that, my mum passed away. So it was just fantastic for me. I remember it so clearly that it, my dad at the gates when I came out. But, it was a wonderful experience to have that sort of recognition of the work that I'd been doing, and to not only was the Metro work, but also British Blind Sport and taking it to where it was.
I can hear it in your voice, Roy. It's that's an unbelievable honour. What about, quickly, if you can, just tell me about your Paralympics and what you achieved and what events you took part in?
Bringing it up to date, last November I was 70, and one of the things that I've got a sort of bucket list things, ski for light. I told you I went in February. One of the things I always wanted to do was to go back to where I took part in the Paralympics in Arnhem in Holland. As we talked about 2012, I said the Olympics was actually in Moscow, and the Soviet Union said that they had no register of disabled people. They had no disabled sport going on in Russia, so they couldn't put it on. So it was going to stop straight away there and then. And luckily, Holland, the Dutch people, put on a national bingo competition and raised about £7 million. And they converted their buses, they converted their airports, they converted ramps, and converted an army barracks and got people involved and put on the 1980 Paralympics. And I went over there with Metro members to compete. I competed in the high jump. My son, who was about 8 or 9, came out to watch me. And my brother, who was about 17 at the time, 81, I was in Germany, 83 in Bulgaria. And then 84, my son had a very nasty car accident coming out of school. I spent 3 months in hospital with him. I couldn't compete 84, but although he got better, I was asked if I'd be chef de mission and take the whole team, Great Britain blind team, to New York. Again, the able-bodied was in Los Angeles. Los Angeles couldn't put on the disability, so they used an old university in Long Island, New York. Again, facilities not very good, but again, it just moves the way that we've moved on. And I'm obviously Mike with Lord Coe, how proud we can be of 2012 with the same facilities, same accommodation, same track, same catering, same, equipment, same, clothing, it's just chalk and cheese between the two.
Wow. Mike, what about you? I mean, you've got books out, your CBE, but also let's start with your achievements in the Winter Olympics and the Paralympics.
Okay, well, I competed in 5 Winter Paralympic Games from 76 to 92. I did 2 Europeans and 3 World Championships as well during that period of time. And then I went on to manage teams at the further 8 Winter and Paralympic Summer Games from 92 then through to 2008. And as part of that, I then got asked to be part of the organising committee in 2003 for the London 2012 Games, on the bid team and everything else in Singapore when we actually in the room when we won the bid, and then on LOCOG through to 2008, 2009 when I stood down as chair of Paralympics GB. Also been managing other sports teams. So I managed athletics teams in 3 European Championship events and a World Championships, and also then managed the England blind cricket team. And then when I was chair of Paralympics GB, which I got elected to in 2001, I got awarded the OBE in 2005 for services to sport. And then New Year's Honours List, I got an upgrade to the CBE, which stands for Commander of the British Empire. And then the other, for me, big honour was in 2016, I got made a Deputy Lieutenant of London, which is my home city. I've lived here all my life. And so I'm now a Deputy Lieutenant of London, along with about 50 others, 60 others. But it's, been a great honour because you're getting awarded for something that you wanted to do anyway. So you still don't really know why and how, but immensely proud. And like Roy, my mum was at the first award of the OBE. And sadly, she passed away the following year, and then managed to get my brother and his wife to the CBE at the Palace. So it's sports given me a hell of a lot back over the years, and you don't want to be rewarded for what you put in, but certainly it is nice to have that level of recognition, I suppose.
Recognition, yeah, absolutely. And what about, talk to me about your books. You've got, is it 3 books out there now? I
wrote the first book in 1980, and that was called Where There's a Will, and that was featured as the backdrop to This Is Your Life programme in 81. And then I published the second book called Don't Ask Me, Ask the Dog. And that was published in 2017. Both of them really cover not just the sport, but it's about losing my sight when I was 10, and then different issues to do with education and work and attitudes to sight loss and the struggle that many of us face in terms of getting things as they should be in terms of equal opportunities, right the way through to confronting some of my own prejudices about guide dogs, and which I've now got on my second one. So yeah, so lots and lots of things in there, both on Talking Book from RNOB or from Amazon on Kindle or in print.
We will also link it to this video as well, where you can get Mike's books from.
Now, you see, you both will know this one thing about me, is that I love the sound of my own voice. But I wanted to end this interview with your voices. So, the question is simple. Any last thoughts? And to the viewers, listeners, subscribers, please don't forget to like this video, give us a thumbs up, and do visit our website and follow us on Twitter. I thank you very much. I now leave you in the hands of Mr. Roy Smith and Michael Brace. I felt like a student at school. I pulled out a pencil with a piece of paper and I just kept writing with glee, because that was truly phenomenal.
You know, I've got nothing but fantastic friendship I've made through Metro, and continue with that friendship. And thank you to Mike and Mo for all the support they gave me back in those early 70s.
I think the only thing that I would add to that is, you know, the experience of running Metro and developing stuff and going on to international committees and all this. The spin-off for that, the skill base that it's enabled me to have in my work. I mentioned I was in a shorthand typing and hated it, but I had the confidence through what I was doing to then, you know, study a bit more externally, do some stuff through correspondence course. Then I went to college, then I got a job as a social worker, then I worked in local authorities, ended up as assistant director, had a wonderful job, but had the confidence to go on and do something else, to set up a national charity, to do the after dinner speaking, and etc., etc. So sport has actually given me so many skills in terms of self-discipline, things that I learned about managing sport. You could then transfer to managing your job. Things I learned to manage in my job, I could then bring to managing the sport. And so it's not just been a one-track era. It really has infiltrated all aspects of my life in terms of, you know, what I do and what I'm interested in.
They get away first time. Tyson Gay right alongside Usain Bolt, but here he goes, streaking away already. It's Bolt all the way. He's looking round at Gay. Watch the clock. It's goal for Bolt, and again he's done it again. A new world record for Usain Bolt. They say lightning doesn't strike twice. Can you believe it? 9.58.